Hello, my name is Deja. I am a lecturer at the University of Cape Town at the South African College of Music in Ethnomusicology and African music. I play saxophone as my studied instrument and guitar as my hobby instrument. I also compose with guitar. I started playing saxophone when I was young. I was 10, like many students in the US who sign up for band and are lucky enough to be in an environment where we can do that. Oh, well, I got interested in African music in particular in the mid-1980s. I was a high school student and my roommate was from South Africa. And he got me interested in Juluka and Ladysmith Black Mambazo, and from there I just sort of followed my own curiosities and eventually wound up in Malawi as a study abroad student. That was in '91, and returned there in the mid-1990s for a couple of years to run a recording studio and to work with music production and to just play with local musicians. Since then have gone back and forth over the years, and I've wound up here. My musical interests remain basically Afro jazz, various African fusions, world music collaborations, as well as jazz in general. And I also have a strong interest in improvisatory music in general, really collective, free improvisation, experimental music, blending both acoustic and electronic traditions. And to be fair, I also played in blues and rock groups and these types of things, so I'm very much into many musical styles, pop, classical, across the spectrum. No. But I can discuss it from my vantage point and help you get an idea. I'm playing with the question, obviously. I think people are going to have different perspectives, but if I were to describe Malawian music, there's a lot going on depending on where you go. This is true wherever you travel. On the popular music side, particularly a foreigner coming in, they will probably notice the strong reggae tradition, and then a pretty strong urban music tradition, dance type of music, and then an emerging Afro jazz, Afro fusion movement. If you go into rural areas, or if you encounter spaces that cater to rural traditions, even if they're in the urban centers and whatnot, you'll have a lot of traditions that use multiple ngoma drums. It looks like a conga, but they're different shapes. But there's a lot of traditions that incorporate several of those of different varieties that have distinctive rhythms across the different regions, but to an outsider, they're going to sound up-tempo, triplet feel type of thing, interlocking rhythms, different vocal melodies and inflections that are maybe pentatonic, maybe modal with some implied harmonic shifts, but really designed to get people participating and singing together. I guess the emblematic traditions is Gule Wamkulu, which is not unique to Malawi because, as many of us know, the borders in Africa were artificially drawn with regard to indigenous indigenous people. So you have Guliwamkulu in Zambia and Mozambique and Malawi, all bordering one another. But it's a mask tradition. It's involved with a secret society. The masks are very ornate. The dancing style is fast, with emphasis on the feet, fast-moving feet. Some acrobatics. Sometimes you use stilts, to elevate the dancer. Another semi-rural tradition would be the banjo tradition of homemade banjos using either just a wooden or the oil can. And this used to be a thriving tradition. It still is to a certain extent. Now it draws a lot from reggae tradition, but it used to draw a lot more from indigenous rhythms. And it was really actually one of the, in my opinion, especially from the 80s to the early 2000s, was one of the driving forces of Malawian music. Malawi reggae is distinctively Malawian, but not necessarily because it draws from indigenous traditions, certainly not directly. The way the keyboardists and guitarists might layer the bubble of the offbeat could be argued that it draws from local traditions of interlocking rhythms, but it's very straightforward 1/4/5, heavy-hitting backbeats that sounds Malawian because one is familiar with the recording process there. Of course, it's hard to describe it. There are different directions now that are drawing more heavily from different traditions, international, but the traditions that dominate tend to be the sort of Lucky Dube type of derivative. It used to draw pretty heavily from roots reggae, but now it's gone into different directions. I think there's still a very strong 1/4/5 Lucky Dube type of tradition out of the Balaka, which is one city center, it's a smaller town, and then Chileka reggae, which is outside of Blantyre. So these two traditions have gone on for generations. When I was a student, I did a study abroad. In the early 90s, it was still under Kamuzu Banda, which was an authoritarian regime, one-party state. And so it was a different vibe. There was censorship, so there was a way of going about lyrics. You would either get censored or you had to be clever with how you did your lyrics. As far as media infrastructure, it was very limited. It was state-owned radio station, one channel when I was there, mono, in 91 and 92, and then they introduced stereo in the late 90s, a second channel, FM2, no local television until the late 90s as well. So the point of that is that you have this sort of a stifling of creative interchange within Africa and abroad. So on the one hand, you'll get in the more sort of semi-urban areas, very creative work done, like I said, on the banjos. But on the poppy music side, you're not always going to get the cutting edge stuff. So, Youssou N'Dour was huge in the 90s, and the whole Afro-pop scene was exploding with the WOMAD Festival. And that missed Malawi. They didn't really catch on to that until at least a decade later. Now there's really fascinating artists in Malawi that are fusing things like Youssou N'Dour and those guys. But it wasn't the case in the 90s. It was very pragmatic, just cater to the local market and get recordings out as much as possible. And you had to look hard for very innovative thinking. It's there, and it still is. It's just now more on the surface. It's important to support the arts and have an infrastructure, that can help people express themselves and then sell their wares, basically.